Hey everyone, this is Carbonite, and I thought I'd actually bring you another tier list. So we are currently in the set 13 meta. We're going to be getting a new set in a couple of weeks, that of course being Lyrical 4, which might shake up the meta a little bit, but I figured let's make some extra content and take a look at how set 13 is actually playing out, I suppose. So let's go ahead and get started. So I do have A through C, and then of course I do actually have underrepresented here, just for decks that basically no one is playing, so it's kind of hard to gauge their how good they are in comparison to everything in the meta. But we are in a kind of a tier 0 meta, but tier 0 kind of implies that there's only one deck, but I guess an S tier meta. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So obviously with Eugene, as of the time of this recording, Eugene got one new support card, and he is still not good. Who would have thought? Restanding Vanguard, still not good enough. Bob has a lot of new tools, but no one's really playing it. Maybe it can do stuff, but I think the problem is that it's just a 3-attack deck, and it doesn't matter how big or aggressive your Vanguard is if, you know, your opponent just has a PG and you can't survive long enough to, you know, burn through their PGs. Nirvana, grade 4. This is definitely an interesting one. I'm going to have to put in underrepresented. I might end up playing around with this, forcing my deck tester to build a deck around this, because we did technically get grade 4 support in set 13, so we'll have to see how that turns out. Overlord is just gonna be always just B tier. Feels like just like four drive checks, 2 Vanguard swings is just kind of gonna be enough to sometimes high roll you to victory. But a lot of the times, the fact that it's not really doing anything except that means that it's probably not ever gonna be any higher until it gets new support. Let's see. Ooh, Nirvana. I have not actually seen Nirvana at all. I kind of want to call it underrepresented. There's a few like Nirvana enthusiasts, and the new support is actually like absolutely nuts. So I think for Nirvana, I think we either put it like low B or high B or low A. I think I'll be generous. I'll give it A for now, just because a lot of the support is insane, but the crossover dress mechanic is honestly just kind of bad. You just minus in order to actually do your things, and it's just, no matter how much cracked and busted support you give it, it's gonna have a hard time no matter what happens. Let's see, next up we have Shoji Doji. I'm going to be generous to Shoji Doji and give him an A. Like I said in the last one, his support is actually completely bonkers and nuts. During our last BCS, there were like 2 or 3 Shoji Dojis in top 8. But unfortunately, I don't think it managed to cinch a top 4 spot. But it is still a very solid deck. Early game aggression is definitely the name of the game these days. So who knows? Maybe Shoji Doji can have a little bit of success. I think... but that's definitely a low A. For Mizuguchi, I unfortunately have to put in underrepresented. Everyone's just playing Shoji Doji instead of Milozuchi, so I can't really say anything to its power level or how good it is. Gandiva is also hurting, I would say. It's still solid-ish deck, but at the same time, it's not really doing the greatest, I would have to say. But it can still do things. You know, you have for Brawl, you have the one new support card. You've got pretty much just that. It's the same guard, but everything else has been kind of just, you know, gotten better around it. Let's see, next to Tamayura, no one is playing Vermilion. No one is playing. These 2 decks are not out. Barrow Magnus. Let's go ahead and rank him. I guess we'll put him in C tier, just for one of my friends, so that he can be here and special with everyone else. Grade 4, same thing with grade 4 Nirvana. No one is playing this. You could theoretically splash in the Stride Fodder Dragons, which is something that I'm going to be maybe trying to work on, but whether or not it's going to be good is, well, I'm not even going to say that's not up to date. It's just not going to be good. Let's see. We have this card, which is not real. Favrenil, also not real. Lutia does hit really big numbers, but it is a very combo-oriented deck. Those Rising Dragons hitting like 40 is actually pretty good here. So I'm just gonna, I'll go ahead and I'll be generous to Luke here. I'll give her a B. She can actually do things. This deck is not real. Chronojet is definitely probably one of the better decks right now. It basically got a better bas relief, and the extra 4 cards is doing a lot for Chronojet. But at the same time, the problem with Chronojet is that it's just doing its old thing. It kind of has a similar Gandiva problem, where it's like, okay, everyone knows what you do now. Everyone knows how to beat you. There's nothing new here, so that gives a small little disadvantage, I suppose. Vivace. Some people play this, I guess, but it's not very good until we get better support. Maybe in Divine Z we'll see a little bit more support to make it relevant, but for now, it's just gonna stay C tier. This is not a real deck. Chaos, I'm gonna put in A again, just because once it hits that turn 4, you kind of just die. Obviously not better than Chronojet, and probably not better than Shoji Doji. Maybe better than this, but of course I don't have enough data to conclude one way or another, unfortunately. Sorry to all you Nirvana fans. I just have not been seeing this deck do very much at my locals, so I can't really say much about it. Algemester, it can do things, but it's not very good at it. Greedon, I would say it's also A. I had the pleasure of testing against this deck a lot, and sometimes 4 drive checks is just very good, except, you know, that's the same thing the Overlord's doing, except it's just better because you have Persona right instantly, and, you know, you actually have a lot of tutoring, you have a lot of deck thinning, and, you know, you have Dark States OT, which is also a bonus for restanding Vanguards. Omino Grugia, I think I can either give this like low A or high B, just because this deck has not been popping up for doing anything. It did technically get another support card, which is very solid, so I'll give it the A tier for now, just as a playable deck. I guess A tier is like decks that are playable in this meta, and then B is you're gonna have to work hard, and C is you're just gonna straight up lose. Basically, S is the only thing you can really play in this meta if you want to be successful. A is if you want to try really hard, or if you want to try hard, and then B is if you hate yourself, I guess. No, C would be if you hate yourself. B is if you want to challenge. Alright, next up we do have our first S tier deck here, that being Dragjewel. Dragjewel is just a very big powerhouse. Once it hits that turn 4, it's very difficult to live 1 turn 4, and it's almost impossible to live 2 turn 4s. But, you know, it is definitely up there. It just, the weight is worth it, and you just have such an explosive power output that it just kills basically anything down here, or basically anything else on the tier list. Majesty I still want to say is A tier, but it's fallen off a little bit. I think I'll put it around Nirvana, because, you know, 4 attacks, very solid, triple drive, 15k base, a lot of good things going for MLB right now. I think one of the issues with it is kind of the price. The Emmeline's, I think the promo is still like kind of expensive even after her reprint, so not a lot of people are playing it. People who already have the deck are opting to play other decks right now, so we're not really seeing a lot of representation. PBO, I won't go as far as to give it C. I'll just give it underrepresented. No one is really playing PBO. I mean, it can do funny things, like you can go 5 drive checks, whatever, but it's just not enough right now. This deck doesn't really have what it takes right now. Maybe if people want to play around with some of the Keter support, try and make the deck better, but you know, it's not really being played because it's probably not that great. Youthberk with new Full Blast, absolutely S tier, one of the top 3 decks of the meta. Definitely very, very good. Just having that, it's a combo deck now, and just having that top end that is insanely explosive and will either kill or guarantee kill on the next turn is very potent and very powerful right now. Grapgase, I'd say Grapgase is B tier. It can actually do a lot of things. It's definitely viable, about as viable as these, I should say. But, you know, you can definitely do things with Grapgase. If you get more support, maybe it becomes a little more solid. Aquamarine, I'm tempted to put in B tier, but at the same time, like, she has not really been doing anything, so I think I'm just gonna put her in underrepresented, because I'm not sure. She could be B tier, but you know, no one's just no one's playing her. Minerva definitely A tier. This I recently just lost to this deck at a locals. It was a very sacky game, but Minerva is still a solid pick. It has a lot of good things going for it. It's got multi-attack to like counter these two. Unfortunately, it's not as fast as these two, but it is still definitely a contender in the meta. Solarion, underrepresented. Thagria, I would say Thagria might be B tier, but I'm going to be putting it here just because no one is playing this deck. Maybe once we get the promo, if you haven't read Thagria's new promo, that is literally a cack. It like it basically just does everything the deck wants to. Maybe the deck will be relevant once it has that promo, but somehow I doubt that. But you know, it's still left to see. Azel, I play Azel. I think that Azel is like a B tier deck. But everyone I play against, they are, or at least my teammate, always says Azel is insane. I mean, like with my order build works very well. And it does technically have a lot of like early rush and aggro, which is going to kill these two decks. But at the same time, I feel with the problem with Azel is, one, you have to wait for your opponent to be on grade 3 before you can actually start playing the game. And 2 is that if you basically run out of steam, you just fold over and kind of die at that instant. So you do have to be very smart when playing Azel. I'll give it a low A, just because, you know, if you play the deck correctly and you get lucky, the deck rewards you with, I guess, a good deck. But if you don't, you get unlucky or you make bad plays, then you're going to flop over and just die to everything else. Alright, so next up we have Bastion. Bastion, still definitely a solid deck. We'll put it around here. I think these 4 decks are roughly the same power level. And then, like, these decks are just kind of like the other side. But Bastion, still a solid deck. You can play grade 4 now with the Stride Fodder Dragon. I don't know if that's the best build, but, you know, I'll leave it up to the Bastion players to decide what the best build of Bastion is. But, you know, it was solid in set 12, still solid now. You've got anti-resist, you've got front row, so you don't really care about Ignis. You can't get bot decked by Youthberk, but you're still an overall solid deck. So, Alden, I have seen this deck in action, and it sure is a deck. It does things. Okay, Gravidia is honestly underrepresented, but yeah, we'll just put it. This is pure Gravidia. It's just a high roll deck, you know, kind of just, you know, just flip over crits, you win. Wow. Prison, I want to put an A, but there are a few problems with it. So, in one instance, Prison does have an advantage that no other deck really has. It's one of the few decks that can actually damage deny at 0, which is going to give it a huge advantage against the big 3 here, meaning that it can stall the game out and kind of do its thing. The problem with that is this deck is too fast. This deck is also kind of too fast and doesn't really need CB. This deck technically does need a little bit of CB, but not really. And this deck wants the game to go longer. This deck can do its thing regardless, and then this deck is like, you know, it doesn't really care that much. So Prison is in a good place right now, but it is not really fit for the current meta. So it is a solid deck. I think I'm just gonna put it back down to B because it has a lot of good matchups. There are, I'm trying to think which one of these. This, maybe. Chronojet doesn't really care. Minerva really doesn't care. Greedon cares a little bit, but not really. Bastion does not care at all. Shoji Doji, probably not. Chaos, maybe a little bit. But a lot of things don't care too much about what Prison is doing right now. So it has good support. It's a very solid deck, but it doesn't have the meta to make it viable right now. Pure Orfist is not real. Ava, surprisingly, I know we're all sick of Ava at this point, but it is still just a solid deck. Just, even it's not really using any of the new support, but it still just does what it does, and what it does is very good. Yeah. Heroes, I'm going to put in A tier. The new support kind of just accelerates the deck. It is very good at early rush and aggro, which these two decks absolutely hate. So it has a very good matchup against them. But the only problem, the thing holding this deck back is the fact that this guy your main Vanguard really doesn't do anything, and the fact that the deck has no counter charge. But mostly the fact that this guy doesn't do anything, he just gives your front row rares an extra 5k, and you know, whoop-de-doo. But yeah, the rear guards are absolutely solid. It kind of has the same Shoji Doji problem where the Vanguard is not the greatest, but the rear guards are absolutely busted. So you know, it's a good solid deck. It rushes and it can do what it needs to. Welstra. Wait for Divine Z, buddy. This deck does not exist. Archite I'm gonna put in B tier because I think it is definitely a solid deck. You can hit like very good numbers. You can just Archite will randomly surprise people. If you ever take Archite to a locals, people are gonna have to read your cards, and then you're gonna say, okay, swing for 50, and they're gonna be like, what? And then you know, you can just auto win off that. Messiah, my boy, Messiah. If you watch my deck list, you know that I've come up with a Messiah build that is totally solid and fixes like 5 of the 10 problems that Messiah has had. But unfortunately, I still don't think Messiah is too great. So I'm actually gonna put it underneath Prison because this is kind of a bad matchup for Messiah. But at the same time, Messiah, Stride deck set, having that crest power is totally solid, and it really outputs numbers. It's actually a deck that's a lot faster than Chronojet. It's also a lot tankier than Chronojet, but at the same time, it just doesn't have the same offensive and long game capability that Chronojet has with all of its Dark State support. And it's just suffering from bad generics and the fact that it needs to run so many pieces. The 54 card update definitely does help Messiah a lot, but unfortunately, until we get new support or just good generic support, I think Messiah is kind of just stuck here in the B tier. Silhouette does not exist. Orfist Mask, I think Orfist Mask is still honestly just a solid deck. Probably these two are probably the best 2 decks of last format, and I think they're still definitely solid in this format. But of course, you still do have to worry about the big 3. Yeah, so this does not exist. Avangarda, I know I put it in A last time, but I honestly haven't played this deck. The deck doesn't really change that much. You have Richter now, which means you have a 3rd Vanguard swing, but you know, it is supposed to be just like a finisher on your turn 4, which sometimes it does do. Like, don't get me wrong, like having 4 drive checks is definitely solid, and especially when they're all connected to a different Vanguard swing, so that's like a PG for each one of them. It's solid, but I don't know. I actually have not been playing this deck since BCS. I got top 10 with it, or 10th place, I guess, basically. But it was definitely a solid deck. It did things, but with Richter, some of the new support is okay. It's not insane, but I have to still figure out my build for that. But I think the deck is perfectly fine. The problem is just the big 3, where it doesn't really have a great matchup against any of those big 3. Grade 3 Magnolia does not exist. Flagberg, C tier. I'm actually gonna rate this one because I've built the deck and played it. My deck build works, but it's not working very good. Magnolia, same thing with the other grade 3 decks. I'll probably be working on this. There might even be a poll on my channel right now, whether what you want me to basically deck test next. Maelstrom is C tier. It doesn't really do enough right now. It's very fun and very cool to play, but it's just not good enough. Granfia, I need to test with this deck because in theory this deck is very solid, but without any like good data, I can't really basically prove that, because I've always called Granfia a glass cannon deck. It kind of has one of the best early games in the game right now, where it kind of just rushes without committing anything from hand. So theoretically, that is a good matchup against these two, because they want the game to go a little bit longer than, you know, just 3 turns, and they don't want to be at 5 by the time they get to grade 3. So theoretically, Granfia has a good matchup against these two, but whether that's substantiated needs to be proven with more data. Let's see. Zorga Masks. I have not honestly seen this very often. I still think the deck is solid. Like, it's another solid contender from set 12. Actually, I don't think it's better than Heroes. But, you know, it's just doing its thing. I did actually lose this deck at BCS, but I kind of more lost to OT and not drawing a PG, but it's still a solid deck, does its thing, and is very good at what it does. Leonor Mask, the pure Leonor Mask version without Vivace, I think is definitely a good deck. Probably better than Zorga. Definitely a good, solid deck. Does a lot of cool things. The new support helps out a bit. I think it really only uses the new grade 1. That was revealed, but that grade 1 is super solid. It does also have access to like Luster Dragon now, which is okay. It gives it the deck a little bit more draw power, but unfortunately Leonor Mask can't stay in the back row, so you're gonna actually have to put it in the front row and use it as an attacker if you want to actually draw off of it. Claudine is B tier, I think. Like, sure, she's solid, she does things, she has insane high roll early game, like she can just kill you before you get to grade 3 sometimes, but if she doesn't, then she kind of doesn't really have a lot to do. Rorowa, I'm gonna put it in C tier because I do actually see this deck. They're like a handful of Rorowa stands at our locals, and they bring the deck every day, and the deck is honestly very scary, just because like it has the same Granfia thing where it has a lot of early aggro rush, and theoretically that would be good going into this meta because you want to rush as early as possible, but at the same time I don't think like Rorowa's power level and like output is going to be strong enough to actually finish things off, even with the new Rorowa. Misty Arc I'm gonna put here because I don't care about. Magnolia Masks, I think it's probably still right now the most solid version of Magnolia to be playing. Probably just like a B tier deck. It is still good, it does things, but the problem I still have with this is you have to commit too much of your deck space to Dragon Tree mark generators. 54 cards might help a little bit. Maybe I'll take a look at Magnolia Masks later to see how it's doing with the new rules update. But for now, I still don't. It's a solid deck, but it's not really going to be winning any tournaments unless you get lucky or are really good. Pure Vivace. So now I do actually have quite a bit to say about Pure Vivace. So I started off this meta just playing Pure Vivace, and it is a very fun deck. It does I would say the biggest draw to this is that you have a lot of free deck space, so you can actually just play a whole bunch of techs. You can play so many different ways. You can add things to counter the meta. You have so much deck space that you can just commit to good cards, good solid generic cards, which unfortunately Stokia doesn't actually have a ton of like solid ones. But I think after seeing a lot of Leonor builds, I think Vivace, Pure Vivace is actually not the play. Pure Vivace is actually very bad. It relies on the Vivace top end, which is, Vivace is a solid card, but by itself it is not good enough, unfortunately. Like all the support is really good. Rosium Fairy, really good. Luster Dragon, very solid. But when you stack it on top of Vivace, she just kind of doesn't have enough pressure. Just the fact that on a restand you're just like swinging 13 and then 8, well not 13, you're swinging like 94 and then 18, and then these other columns, which are like, unless you got a defensive or not defensive, you got a trigger, are not really hitting very well. Just kind of isn't enough for Vivace, and also just like losing on triple drive, I guess, is also a downer. So I think Pure Vivace, not very good. I think Pure Mask is even better than that. But what I think is actually the top deck, the S tier, the big three, the third big three, is the mixed builds where you go Vivace, Mask, and Leonor. This is a deck I have been playing most in this set 13 meta, and I think it is just overall the most solid of the three builds, just because Mask, like I said, is better than Vivace, but I think just adding like 2 or 3 Vivaces into the build is pretty solid because it just gives you more than one top end. Like, the problem with Mask is that you need your pieces, you need to find Mask, you need to find the Order, you need to find, well, you don't need to find Dragon Tree Wrench. Dragon Tree Wrench is there to help you find those two things, but giving you a second top end is really what makes the deck consistent enough to actually, you know, be playable. Because if you go to Leonor and you go to your turn 4 and you don't have another Leonor to ride, you're kind of in a pinch. So at least having 2 top ends makes it that much easier and that much more consistent that you'll actually reach that final kill turn that you need to. Bugs, no one plays this bug. No one plays this bug. This bug, I'm going to put it in A tier because I think that bugs are honestly kind of solid. The same thing with, what would I say? The same thing I would say about, you know, this and this. Very good early rush. Restanding Vanguard technically. But bugs are kind of a threat in the meta. But not as much as maybe some of these other decks. I think they're perfectly fine right now. You know how to play bugs, you can easily beat them. Kyrie doesn't exist. Kyrie did technically get a new support card, but I haven't seen anyone play it. Michu, no one's playing that. I hate this deck. Lutia, I'll put it in B tier. I've seen like one person play this deck to some success. It did show up at BCS, almost got to the top. It was in top tables for quite a while. This deck does not exist. This deck does not exist. This got a new promo. None of these exist. No one is playing Willista, unfortunately, so I can't really give it a good grade, but I think the deck is still solid, so I won't go as far as to give it A because I don't have enough data, but I will at least give it a B tier, kind of put it around here. Kind of sad that Willista is no longer playable. Maybe once BT4 comes out, she gets a little bit better, but we'll have to see how that turns out. This does not exist. These decks are coming out in a few weeks. Okay, so our last one is Dragon Tree, and Dragon Tree is a C tier deck. I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm gonna say Dragon Tree is the best C tier deck because it's very funny. 18k base Vanguard is very funny, and 28k base Vanguard is even funnier. But of course, you know, you're not really doing a whole ton with the deck, but it's definitely fun to play. Alright, so that's what this tier list is looking like. It's basically just, you know, big three at the top, and then you've got a bunch of solid decks down here in A tier, and a couple more solid decks here in B tier that you could play, but your main threat, the main thing that you need to be worried about is these big three. If you want to play in this meta, you can play any deck that you really want to here, but you do have to know how to play against these big three, which, quick plug for my channel, I'm doing a how to beat series for all three of these decks. Go watch that if you haven't already, and I guess that's it from me, so I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to do those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.